I'm Debbie Voigt, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Debbie, welcome to Living the Classical Life. We're really thrilled to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
So we've caught you at a very busy time. So it's the 25th year anniversary of your first appearance at the Met. You were also just appointed to the faculty of the San Francisco Conservatory, and this season also sees the premiere of a role that was created for you in Roscoe, an American grand opera. Did the world of stage always come naturally to you?
Well, the world of being able to communicate with an audience always came naturally to me. Even from the time when I was a little girl singing at church, I knew that when I sang, I elicited some sort of emotional response from an audience. That it ended up being opera, that would be my stage for my life, was really random. I was in love with musical theater, did a lot of that in high school, and then decided that I wanted to take some voice lessons. And there were only two options in Southern California at the time. One was about an hour drive from my home with someone who taught the likes of Michael Jackson and lots of pop stars and was very expensive. Or there was the wife of my high school choral conductor, who was, of course, there and very inexpensive. So that's the option my parents chose. And she was an opera singer. And that's really how my journey began. That being said, I always had a fairly large instrument. I never went through that phase that junior high girls and maybe freshman girls do where you have a very breathy sort of vocal production. My voice was always very masky and very well placed. So it was a good foundation upon which to build a classical technique.
So if you felt so natural on stage, did you in fact ever encounter a moment in which you were in the wings, you were looking out at the stage, and you thought to yourself, as I have on numerous occasions before walking onto stage, I can't do it?
Yes. Pretty much every performance that goes through your head, at least for a nanosecond. And I try to tell my students that those little moments are the moments where you have to practice immediately sending another message behind that one, which is, this is going to be fantastic. I'm going to nail the high notes. Whatever difficulties you think you're going to encounter, that if you can switch your thinking, it can produce a better performance. But I don't think any singer who is engaging on stage, who you find vulnerable, who you want to watch, goes on stage feeling completely confident, because that takes away that edginess that is so important to live performance.
How long do you have to allow yourself to learn a role? You've sung many times with huge, the Ring cycle, for example, Brunhilde. How do you get through that?
Well, I will be honest and say that I am Miss Procrastinator. And if there were ever an opera to be written called Miss Procrastination, I know that it would be written for me. And maybe I'll talk to Evan about his next project being called Miss Procrastination. So I tend to put things off until the last minute, and then I panic. And I've told myself for years and years and years I'm not going to do that anymore. And finally, a coach who's worked with me for almost my whole career said, Debbie, this is how you work. This is the way that you inhabit these things. I try to have a life. And trying to have a life with the sort of career that I've had is very difficult, because being an opera singer at this level is so consuming. So I put things off, and then I dive in, and I'm absorbed with the process. And at this point in my career, I don't have to add too many new roles, the one we're going to discuss being separate from that. And it's nice. I was on vacation recently, and I realized that it was the first time in years that I wasn't sitting on a beach with a score on my lap and trying to memorize something while taking in the beauty of the beach. So I'm enjoying having a little bit more flexibility and being able to do projects that are interesting to me and not just what is expected because of the sort of career that I have and the repertoire that people want to hear me sing, which I'm very blessed to sing. But they're all very serious ladies and very dramatic ladies. And I often think, what if that teacher that had been an opera singer had been, a country western singer or something? What might my life have been like had I gone down another path entirely? Because I sometimes feel that there are aspects of my personality that I'm not able to share across an orchestra pit. There's not a lot of giggles in the ring cycle.
Absolutely.
Well, not intentional ones anyway. Except maybe when Siegfried realizes that Brunhilde is not a man. That's always a chuckler for the audience.
So with this trajectory of your career, did you feel like you were surprised by some of your successes? Were you prepared for the trajectory that you found?
I was absolutely not prepared, and in a way, I think that might have been a blessing for me because I didn't have expectations of where I had to be. You mentioned my position with the conservatory in San Francisco, and I have a couple of really young students that are 17 and 18 years old, and one in particular is her whole life is opera. And I feel as though she's going to be disappointed if she doesn't reach the pinnacle that I've been so lucky to reach. And I try to tell them to, rein it in, that it's a process, that it takes a long, long time. But no, I could never have foreseen where my career would take me. So it's all been a wonderful surprise. That being said, it's been going on for 30 years now. And you go through a phase which I kind of call the honeymoon phase, where people are hearing you for the first time, the press is hearing you for the first time, and you're the Wunderkind and this fantastic voice that's come along. And then a couple of years later, you sing something and they say, well, that was nice, but what else can she do? And it's a never-ending process of learning new repertoire, learning how to express different parts of your personality. I've been lucky in that I've had a tremendous recital career and concert career as well. And all of that takes an enormous amount of time and concentration. And had I known 30 years ago that would have been the path, I might have paused for a moment.
So you didn't say when you were a girl, I want to be famous?
No.
Nothing like that.
No. My home environment was one where saying that I wanted to be famous would have been considered a little bit showy and worldly. I came from a very conservative Baptist background. And so to have the desire to be in front of a church audience is one thing, but to be singing secular music was something else. And it took a long time for my family to embrace that my reality and my career was going to be singing these larger-than-life characters, and some of which do things that, my parents were shocked when I decided to sing Salome. And my mother called me about 2 weeks before the opening night with the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and she said, Debbie, I don't think a Christian girl would take her clothes off on stage. And I said, Mom, it's a body stocking, and it's lights, and, mirrors and smoke, and it's that quick. When the performance actually happened, that didn't bother her. What bothered her was the final scene where Salome is, in fact, kissing the head of John the Baptist. That creeped her out more than anything. But she got past it. She survived it. But she still thinks my crowning achievement was singing Agnes Gooch in Mame. And forget Isolde.
I'm curious to hear about your personal relationship yourself with regards to two of your signature roles, Sieglinde, who was very trapped and isolated, as opposed to Salome, who was quite the opposite, very seductive and very sexual.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, they have some similarities in that they're both trapped for different reasons. Sieglinde, the thing I love about Sieglinde is that she has so much hope. She finds herself in this just horrific situation with this man who abuses her, and yet she hopes that there's something better. She wants something better. And when Siegmund comes in, she recognizes him, and for Wagnerian reasons that we don't need to go into here. But she just runs off with him, and it's just beautiful to me. Salome is a frustrated teenager, and that's a little bit difficult to play when you're not 17 years old. And, Strauss has written this incredibly difficult role to sing and puts the character at someone who would have to be at least 20 years younger than you're playing. So I have to look back and think, well, I know what it felt like to be a temperamental teenager who wasn't getting what she wanted. I may not be able to relate to being the princess in the palace, but I find that with any role that I'm singing, I may not be able to necessarily relate with the specific activities or situations of those characters, but if I look back and try to identify or look at that moment and identify what the emotion is that the character is going through, generally you can look back through your life and say, well, I remember when I felt that way. It might not have been for the same reasons, but the emotions are the same. And I often tell my students, I don't really care what you're thinking about. It's not, we don't need to be in your head. We just have to see that you're thinking and that you're feeling something. And I learned that from a director named Günter Kramer, because I was doing Liebe der Danae, and there was a very, very long passage of music where I had to be just sitting and thinking. So I'm sitting there and putting on a face that looks like I'm thinking. And he said, I don't care what you're thinking about. You could be thinking about your grocery list. We just need to see that something's going on.
So with these types of characters, at what point when you're preparing the role, do you integrate the acting? Or do you consider that acting at all? It sounds like maybe that's just part of being yourself and relating to your past experiences.
Well, with the way that opera has changed so much during the course of my career, and everything becoming so much more visual, none of us can be members of what we used to call Park and Bark Club, which was find your spot on the stage. Hopefully it's the sweet sound in the stage, because all of them have them, and not moving. As I've gone on in my career and am able to sing these characters who are so rich and have such incredible internal lives and emotional lives, the acting part of it has become much more interesting to me. But it's all layers. It's all part of building. First you work with the language, then you add the music, then you add the phrasing, then you start to speak or to work with a coach who knows the stylistic interpretations of whatever it is that you happen to be singing, and then you start to act the role. And the closer I get to a performance, the more I find myself thinking about the character, and not necessarily even singing her, but just thinking about her emotional journey. And all characters do that, and that's what makes them so interesting. It's why Brunhild is, Valhalla, no pun intended, for a soprano, because she has such an enormous arc over all of those performances, and she's such a completely different character from the time that we meet her as this tomboy to the time that she becomes human and falls in love with this man, and what is that all about? And then is betrayed, and it's just such a incredible experience to be able to think about that kind of a journey from point A to point Z.
What's acting charisma? What is charisma in general? Is it something that you're born with? Is it something to do with confidence?
I think to a certain extent it is something that you're born with. When a particular singer walks out on stage and you're immediately drawn to them, that's, I think, something that is given to them. But confidence also has something to do with it. And so if a singer can be as confident as they can be in the role that they're going to portray, they're going to be more charismatic than if they go out and their confidence isn't what it can be. But it isn't really something that can be taught. Charisma is something that is a gift.
About a year ago, I was driving my car around in Cleveland, and I turn on my favorite show, the Diane Rehm Show, and I hear someone speaking with remarkable self-awareness about her struggles in her life and confidence issues. And I actually had to pull the car over, and then I learned that it was you. And subsequently, I read your book, and you were very, very open about your struggles. Were you confident as a young lady?
Yes and no. And I think that most artists are that way. We wouldn't be able to walk out on stage and do what we do if we didn't have a certain amount of confidence. That being said, the vulnerability that I mentioned earlier comes from having experiences that are maybe more painful than others. So I think it was both, and it depended on the environment that I was in. If I was singing in front of church, I was very confident. If I was at home and there was something going on that was troubling in the home, then that was another matter entirely.
So you described how your confidence issues in various capacities led to struggles with weight and addictions. I'm interested in exploring this idea because I get the sense from many of my friends and colleagues that artists are often self-described as very addictive personalities. I'm trying to get a sense if addictions are related to the artistic impulse and the passion and the obsession and the wanting to follow a drive.
Well, you'll find addiction in every walk of life, from the person who is the janitor to the person who runs a major company. Addiction, at the heart of it, has much to do with never being satisfied with what you have and wanting more of something, more food, more alcohol, whatever your thing is. And in order to have a successful career, you have to have that kind of drive too. And then when you layer in perhaps genetic predisposition to it, the loneliness and the isolation that comes with having the sort of career that I've had, you sing a fantastic performance, the audience loves you, they meet you at the stage door, you give your autograph, and then you go back to your hotel room and you are very much alone. And if you are someone who has had trouble learning how to self-soothe, you can begin to look for other things that will bring you down, bring you peace, get you out of your head. For me, that was always the issue, wanting to escape being present in the moment. And I don't know why. It's not something that I can explain, and I think if you were to speak to many addicts, that they can't really identify what is it, but it's there. And we have to come to the point where we accept that. I went through years and years of therapy, and at the end of the therapy, you find out why you believe this, or you felt this, or you had this experience. But at the end of the day, even having all of that knowledge about yourself, you still have to make a choice, and you still have to take an action.
What do you suggest to people who have addictions?
Well, there isn't much that can be suggested until they realize that they have a problem. You can, as my family did, try to say, we're concerned, and you should, as a family member, say that. But at the end of it, until a person who has these issues says, I give up, I'm powerless over this, I cannot deal with this anymore, there's really nothing that can be done. It's a individual, private reality, and nothing can happen until you give that up. And that doesn't mean that when you do, that it's gone. There's not a day that goes by that I don't want to eat a cake or, have a glass of champagne or a bottle of champagne with it, or fall into some bad relationship or other. But I have to choose what's going to be best for my life now.
So with the struggle with weight, what was the turning point for you? When did you decide that enough was enough?
Well, let's see, what time is it? Well, I just got tired of worrying about it and thinking about it. I got tired of the things that normal people never think about. For example, I'm getting on an airplane and I'm in economy, and am I going to fit in the seat? These sorts of things. Is the seatbelt going to fit? Is the chair going to support me? Things that normal people just don't think about. I got tired of all of that taking up space in my brain. And I was beginning to have arthritic problems. I've inherited tremendous orthopedic problems from my mother, but I think I got my winning smile from her too, so it's kind of okay. But nonetheless, I just had enough. I had tried every diet known to mankind, and finally decided to have gastric bypass surgery. And when that first started to come into play years and years and years ago, I thought I would never do that. I would never do it. But when you are pushed up against the wall, and also I knew that Brunhilde was probably coming around the corner, and there were roles that I wanted to play that I knew I wouldn't be able to get away with it, or that I wouldn't be as convincing. in the role. I mean, I think of the Egyptian Helen, supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world. It's hard for a woman who weighs 300 plus pounds, no matter how pretty a face she may have, to go out on stage and have people say you're the most beautiful woman in the world and not want to crawl in a hole. So to have that removed from my life freed up a lot of opportunity to interpret, to play characters with more conviction, to remove that barrier between myself and the audience. They didn't have to get over that when I first walked out on stage. And my ex-husband said to me once, we were talking about weight, and somehow or other we got onto the subject of when I make an entrance on stage, and he, in his very loving way, and maybe partially why he's my ex-husband, told me that, he said, well, honey, you're a big woman, and there's some people do giggle a little bit. And I thought, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I don't want that to be part of my repertoire.
Yeah. So could one also make the argument, perhaps, that a singer needs to maintain a certain amount of weight in order to maintain vocal quality?
It depends on the singer. It really does. I mean, dramatic voices are going to have bigger barrel-chested. They're going to have rounder faces. They're probably going to have a little bit more girth to them. But there's a difference between having some weight on you that grounds you, that looks good on a stage the size of the Metropolitan Opera, and being obese. That's something else, because as an obese person, that addiction that an alcoholic can hide, a drug addict can hide, whatever. When you're an obese person, you walk on a stage and people immediately know there's a problem. Nobody, and I'm sorry to friends or folks out there who say that they're completely happy being 300 plus pounds, I don't believe it. I just don't believe that that's really where they would want to be. Acceptance is one thing, but I can't imagine that that's really where people want to live.
What would you tell a young student who has a unique voice but struggles with weight?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had this conversation about a week ago, actually, with a young woman who was doing the Metropolitan Opera district auditions in San Francisco, and she had a lovely voice, but she was really quite heavy, and I did talk to her about it, and I think she was shocked that I brought it up, but I think it has to be a discussion, and I don't think it's something that has to be associated with shame. It just is what it is. That's what she has to deal with. But the sooner she hears that this is going to be something that is going to get in your way throughout the rest of your career, I think that's important. I had my opera director in college. I was in a costume fitting, and we were, having to try to put something together. And he said, Debbie, you're going to have this problem for the rest of your career if you don't do something about it. And he was right. The only thing that bothers me, at least within the world of opera, is that there doesn't seem to be the same discrimination or standard held to men that women go through. I can remember a performance with, and I'll just leave his name out, but a very large tenor. And during the performance, I had on, of course, a long gown, and I had to kneel and I had to get up. And I stepped on my dress, and so did a little, bobble. Can happen to anyone. The review came out and said that Deborah Voigt couldn't move on the stage, that she almost stumbled getting up off the stage, but that the tenor had the shoulders of a linebacker.
Oh,
and
that's astonishing.
I thought, really? The tenor and the stomach of a what? But anyway, that bothers me.
Are opera houses today more interested in looks as opposed to vocal quality?
I think that if you have a singer who has an internationally recognizable voice that is the cream of the crop, that is gifted, has a God-given talent, that talent is going to float to the top no matter what. That will happen. It's the next ring down where the singers are, maybe one is not any more spectacular than another. They're both equally qualified for the same part. I believe that the theater will take the thinner person. I just think that is the reality of where we are.
Let's talk about preparing a role. You're going to be singing in Roscoe, a role basically created for you. Is it different inhabiting a new role as opposed to a role from the standard repertory?
Well, in a way, it's really a blessing, because part of the problem with singing these iconic roles that I sing is that there is constant comparison. you can't sing Brunhilde without someone saying, well, Birgit Nilsson was the best Brunhilde in the world. In this particular situation, there have been some readings of Veronica and of this piece, but in terms of having the orchestral part as well, it's me. So there's, when 10 years from now, 20 years from now, someone says, well, who was the first Veronica and Roscoe you ever saw? It was Deborah Voigt. She was the best one ever, because I was the first one that they ever heard. But I find that to be true with a lot of things, that people's impressions and what remains with them in terms of their favorite has to do with who they heard for the first time.
For people who have never seen a new opera, what can they expect from this work? I think certain people might be apprehensive about a new work.
Well, I think the thing that I am enjoying the most about it is, yes, it's an opera, but it has a very jazzy, sort of lightness to it that is, for me, coming especially from my Germanic background, is really enjoyable. So I don't think people need to come in with the preconceived idea that it's going to be some sort of, heavy Wagnerian sort of experience. That being said, we do hear a little bit of Wagner in the piece.
Was there ever a moment at any point in your career in which you were performing and you felt that I am now authentically myself? And did that have anything to do with the before or the after with the weight loss?
I don't think so, because the moments that I felt particularly validated in what I do have been all different times of my life and sizes of my life, and whether it was in this relationship or that relationship. And I mean, I was as big as a house when I sang my first Sieglinde opposite Placido Domingo at the Met. And yet, when I walked out on stage with him after the first act for our curtain call, the overwhelming response of the audience was, we could feel it. It was just like this wave of emotion. And I remember thinking, okay, this one will stay with me forever. And then fast forward, and I'm falling off of the Robert Lepage set in Brunhilde, and that's a defining moment as well.
Did that actually happen?
I didn't really fall off, but the opening night of Die Valkyrie, I'm in the wings, and they were recording this for a documentary, so there's cameras, and I'm standing there with my spear, and it's time, it's Brunhilde, hoya to ho, hoya to ho. And my first move was to walk on stage and step onto the machine, as we called her, and I stepped on my dress instead of with my rubber boot, and went right down on and slid down the plank. And I just wished that I had a tape recorder in my head to record what was going through my mind in that particular moment. It would be full of expletives, I'm sure. And Bryn Tervel, bless his heart, came walking over to give me a hand to get back on the machine, and I'm not getting on that thing. So I sang the whole scene from the apron. But yeah, I came off stage and I could not believe it had happened. It was one of those moments where you think everything goes into slow motion, and you think, well, surely they're going to pull in the curtain and we're going to start over. It's kind of like that moment when Kanye West got up and took the microphone away from Taylor Swift. And I thought, we're going to start over, right? We're going to cut and do this again.
Are you aware of your audience when you're performing? Are you consciously trying to keep them in a zone of listening? I imagine that would actually be rather maddening.
Well, I'm very much aware of them, there's no question. And everyone who comes to any sort of theater piece should know that they are part of the performance, that the energy that they put out, we do feel. That being said, I don't try to reel them in. I try to reel myself in. And if I can get myself into the zone and where I need to be, which is right in the moment, things tend to go better in terms of bringing in the audience. But audiences are different. A Monday night audience is much different from a Saturday night audience, and certainly different from a matinee audience. So we kind of go out knowing, it's Monday night, maybe so-so.
So how do you get in the zone? Particularly if you're not in the zone, what do you do?
Well, that's a tough one, because you can't always get there. I mean, that's part of live performance, that they're not all the same. and we're not. I had James Levine tell me once, "Baby, we're not machines. You know, we make mistakes, and we." That being said, I do spend some time in my dressing room looking over the music and trying to focus as much as I can. But then I also need to have some laughs or some levity before I go out on stage. So I will often go sit out with the costume people and the makeup people and have a really good laugh and then go out on stage. I also pray a lot, so, which helps.
Are you also influenced by the musicians you work with? You mentioned Domingo earlier. What was his influence on you?
The thing that I enjoyed the most about Placido is that he's a workman like the rest of us. I was very nervous to be singing with him the first time, and I said to the director, "Oh, but I'm so nervous. It's Placido Domingo." And she said, "You're going to love him. He works like everybody else. He shows up on time. He knows his music. He does his work. He interacts with you." And that turned out to be absolutely true. And the other thing that is really special about him, and not something that is universal, is that when you're on stage with him, he is making eye contact with you. He is present with you in the moment. And that is really something that is special, because then you feed off of each other.
Is that unusual?
It can be. I mean, I have absolutely sung with people who are paying very little attention to what's going on between each other and thinking more about what is coming up next. And we all do that to a certain extent, because the way opera is paced, there are moments that you have to step back from emotional entanglement so that you can be prepared for whatever's coming up technically. There are moments where you cannot give yourself over to the crying and the weeping if you've got to pop off a high C. You have to be able to pull back and still give that emotion, but switch to a more technical way of thinking and how you're going to set up the 2 pages prior to that note, because that's when it starts. It doesn't start 2 measures before, it starts 2 pages before.
Is it possible to ever be able to let go of technical thinking and inhabit just the emotional realm or the act of making music? Is that ever completely out of the picture?
I don't think it's ever completely out of the picture. Certainly with roles, for example, Sieglinde, that I have sung quite a bit, and that particular role lies in a very comfortable part of my voice. So there aren't too many really scary moments with her, and so I'm able to just sort of free myself up and really play the part. But with most of the others, there are moments that you just I can't afford to just lose myself entirely. I wouldn't get through Götterdämmerung if I did that.
You've had such a long and storied career. Have you ever thought about what you would like to be remembered for by the time you retire?
I would like to be remembered for having made a contribution with the composers that I've sung, that I made an impact, had an impact, that there will be audiences 20 years from now who will say, "Oh, I remember Deborah Voigt, she was really wonderful." But I also would like them to say, and she was also a really lovely person, and she gave back in that she wanted to teach and wanted to help and kept trying to rediscover herself, myself, as much as I can.
We've now had a chance to read your remarkable book, and in chapter 1, you describe an incident when you were, I believe you were 13, and you described that God spoke to you. What was the message?
Well, you know, it's such a strange memory, because it happened, and what I heard, felt, resonated within me was, you are meant to sing. And I had been singing from the time I was a child, but there was something about that moment. And I remember the room, I remember the atmosphere, I remember the time of day. It was not something that was necessarily audible, but there was no question in my mind, but that it was, in the way that I believe, in the way that I've lived my life, that it was my God. And I didn't speak about it to anyone. I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell anyone, because it was just such a personal, intimate sort of thing. And it didn't come up again until I was probably 21, 22, and in a lesson with one of my voice teachers, and I was a crier in my lessons, as I'm discovering so are my students, because it's such an emotional process and it's such an intimate process, trying to fix something that is in your body and so much a part of yourself. It's hard not to take it personally. And so I was, crying, and she says, "Why are you so upset?" "I don't know. I feel like this is what I was supposed to do, but I just can't get it." And I told her about this moment. And I was very embarrassed talking about it. And she paused and she looked at me and she said, "He was absolutely right." And then I never spoke about it again to anyone else until I wrote my book and talked about it then. But I'll never forget it. And I believe it. And I can't imagine what else I would have done. I'm not really good at anything else. So it all worked out.
Do you feel like you've lived up to that expectation or responsibility of hearing the voice of God?
I think I've done the best that I could. And yes, I've had a lot of struggles. And sometimes I think if I had not had those struggles, would things be better? Would I be further along in my, self-awareness? I don't know. If I believe that I was given this gift, then I have to believe that the things that presented themselves along the way were presented for a reason. I don't really believe that anything is random in my life. I mean, I don't believe anything's random in your life either, but but I just think that everything that I've had to go through or that I have gone through has been for a reason. I think it's made me a much richer performer. I remember in particular, early on in my career, I was doing a concert with the New York Phil, and it was Beethoven's A Perfido. And I had gone through this just a heartbreaking breakup. I mean, just one of those on the floor in the fetal position breakups. I did the concert, and I put all of that angst into that performance. And the New York Times review said Deborah Voigt must have had acting lessons.
Oh.
And I thought, no, Deborah Voigt just had her heart broken. And had that not happened, then, that would have been a whole aspect of my emotional life that I would not have been able to put into some of the heartbreaking characters that I have. And it's interesting now to be working with, as I mentioned, very young singers who have not had these life experiences. And, they all want to sing big, huge, they all want to be Tosca. They don't want to start out singing 24 Italian songs. And they don't have the life experiences yet to draw upon. And so trying to explain that to them and just say, I'll tell you what, go off, have a love affair. Well, I really can't say that at school, or they probably turn me into human resources. But anyway, have a chance to mature a little bit and see what happens.
And finally, is there anything that you still hope to achieve?
I would like to have a really fulfilling personal life at this point. I want to keep singing, but it's been very hard to maintain even friendships, even relationships with my family, because I'm gone so much. And my mind is always consumed with whatever it is I'm studying or preparing for or traveling to. And I'm looking forward to having the choice to sing what I want to sing, when I want to sing it, and to just settle for a while, have a home life and have friends and, dare I say, a romance.
Debbie, thank you so much for being here. I'm very touched by everything that you shared from your life and your musical experiences, and I hope that our viewers can really benefit from all the lessons that you shared.
Thank you
very much.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It was fun.